Welcome to God Knows Where. I'm Brett Harris. I've got a stack of books on my bedside table, all waiting to be read on one single topic: rivers. Actually, just this one river in particular, the Pascagoula River and all its tributaries, including the creek that runs not far from my house. I'm fascinated by the Pascagoula, not just because I live in its watershed and play with my kids in one of its tributaries and started writing a novel about it in those months after I left the church and had no job, but because of how the Pascagoula has remained one of America's most wild and untamed rivers to this day. But those are stories for another day, maybe another podcast or the completion of that book I started. Who knows? But they've had me thinking a lot about rivers lately, and I realized how many great stories from our tradition take place in or on the banks of rivers. So selfishly, as I pick up these books and read about the Pascagoula and work on a project about it beyond God Knows Where, I'm going to spend the next series here at God Knows Where reflecting on those stories and those rivers that shaped our tradition. From the rivers flowing out of Eden and the Nile, where Moses was found, and the Jordan in which Jesus was baptized, to the crossings and healings and transformations that happen in other rivers around the area, our tradition has been shaped by the flowing, living water all around us, both by the boundaries they provide and the ones God breaks within them. So I hope you'll join me. To get us started, here's a look at those rivers that flow out of Eden. It's a take I've shared before, but whether you're new to God Knows Where or if you've been here for a while, I think it's one that bears repeating. Thanks to everyone who continues to support the show as we trust that God knows where this is all going. We just got a new financial supporter last week, meaning there's more we can do here for you at God Knows Where. So feel free to join them at any time. There's a link in the show notes to support the show. And if you message me the name of the band whose song is the inspiration for today's title, I'll make sure you get a little gift from God Knows Where very soon. Hope you enjoyed today's episode, Eden Flow. A reading from Genesis 2. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, when no plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was no one to till the ground, but a stream would rise from the earth, and water the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden, in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. Out of the ground the Lord God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A river flows out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divides and becomes 4 branches. The name of the first is the Pishon. It is the one that flows around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are there. The second river is the Gihon. It is the one that flows around the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is Tigris, which flows east of Assyria, and the fourth river is the Euphrates. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall die." In the early aughts, back when I was in college, if you watched someone survive situations you never hoped to find yourself facing, if you liked watching that kind of thing, you had a choice to make. Would you rather watch Les Stroud's Survivor Man or Bear Grylls' Man vs. Wild? Some preferred Stroud's grittier, no-nonsense, clearly self-filmed with a lousy tripod style, while others opted for Grylls' more daring, cinematic exploits. No matter who you chose, they both told you to do the same thing first. Find a source of water. It could be a source of drinking water, or a pool where you might catch a fish, but often it was a creek or a river. These were more likely to provide you what you needed, something to drink, something to eat, and a way to get back home. For thousands of years, humanity has thrived around rivers. We've found success farming in their floodplains, fishing in their pools, using their energy to grind our grains, move our goods, and power our lives. But rivers don't just help us survive and thrive. They guide us. They guide us as we search for answers to big questions. Maybe that's because every river has a source. If we walk a river backwards, if we go upstream, we'll eventually get to the place where it all began, where the journey began, and maybe that source can help us figure out where we came from. Maybe it's because every river flows toward the sea, a vast expanse teeming with life and answers and more questions about life itself and untold adventures. Maybe it's because all rivers tell stories, the stories of times gone by and the story of our world. Rivers have been helping us work through our questions and find our way even before this story about the Garden of Eden was first written down, at least as far back as the last ice age. That last ice age ended somewhere around 10,000 years ago. Our ancestors then had no roots. They hadn't yet started farming and settling down. They hunted and gathered whatever they could find to survive in the wilderness. They were survivalists in the truest sense. And as they roamed, some of our ancestors found themselves between two of the rivers we read about in Genesis, the Tigris and the Euphrates. That sweet spot where civilizations would rise up and where we'd write down an answer to our questions about how we got here. As they approached the banks of those rivers, some of our ancestors followed them downstream, toward the seas, toward the unknown. Those who went downstream found that the rivers surrounded areas full of precious metals that they would one day learn to smelt and shape and build with, areas full of fertile soil they would one day cultivate and plant and harvest, areas wild with life that would one day come to be divided and subdivided and named and fought over and populated by people who spoke different languages and wrote about life with different words. And if they went far enough, they'd find the seas that would lead them on some of the greatest journeys we've ever known. They were blessed by what the rivers made possible and how the rivers shaped what they saw as they followed them downstream. But those who went upstream weren't disappointed either. In that area between the sources of the Tigris and the Euphrates, not far from a little town in Turkey called Urfa, our ancestors came upon a valley absolutely filled with life. The miles they walked in search of the source was more than worth it. Hunting and gathering effectively became shooting fish in a barrel. 10,000 years ago, what is now a desolate, harsh wilderness was a lush, green haven full of plants and animals, many we no longer know today. It had everything these people needed to survive and thrive. It was Edenic. They found the paradise the writer of Genesis describes for us. And when they got there, they didn't settle down. They didn't clear cut and burn the forests so they could take on the oh-so-easy task of tilling and farming the land. They didn't trap or catch or ensnare all of the animals they could so they could gorge themselves. They weren't there to live in tall cotton or high on the hog. They let the land and the water and the sky provide for them. They used only what they needed, and they worshiped. That's right. Before they did many of the things we do in civilized society today, they stopped and gave thanks or paid homage or whatever you want to call it for the gift of this paradise. We know this because Klaus Schmidt and other archaeologists have unearthed Göbekli Tepe over the last couple of decades, the oldest known sign of human worship, but there they have yet to find any signs of civilization. Only large limestone carvings in circular patterns, bones of wild animals, and other organic material. Some of our ancestors followed the rivers we read about today to their source, and when they got there, they worshipped. They didn't sing 3 hymns and say 3 prayers and listen to somebody like me talk for too long. They built statues to help them remember and give thanks for the provision. And when they were done, they covered it all up with rocks and dirt and went on about their business. There was no use for their shrines in the midst of that wild and wonderful river valley. While they had everything they needed there, everything they could imagine was there for them. The berries weren't going to pick themselves, and the deer weren't going to hunt themselves, and the fish weren't going to jump on the hook all alone. They had work to do, and they got back to it, because they had to focus on making it through the day. On the other hand, when we come to Eden, when we come to it through these stories we have in Genesis, we want to jump ahead to the story we already know, the one we've heard 1,000 times over, the one that makes us think that the first thing that happened was that we made a mistake. But like our ancestors, we've got to pay attention to the rivers first. Because the story the rivers tell us is that before we did anything, before there even was a we, the rivers were spreading the goodness of that original blessing wherever they ran and guiding all of life toward abundance, no matter which way we would ever follow them. There's probably no better metaphor for grace that I can think of. Upstream, downstream, the rivers tell us there's God's abundance to be found wherever we find ourselves. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to be anybody. We simply have to live life today and pay attention and know that God is creating blessings all around us. When we don't pay attention to the rivers, that's when we start looking in other places for the truth, in what we can accomplish or change or build. When we lose sight of the rivers, we lose sight of that abundance. And as much as we try to put it back together with our farming and cultivating and building and recreating, the covers are never as good as the originals. Wild rivers like the Mississippi become nothing more than canals for commerce. When we lean into the story of Eden and read it only as a story about us and what we did and what we lost and hope to get back someday, we stop looking around us to see how creation was set in motion. And that's when we start harming creation. That's when we start clogging up our rivers, sending what we're throwing away down their streams where we don't have to look at it. That's when we start demanding our soil to give us more and more and more. That's when we start clear-cutting and burning down our forests to find more soil, to grow more food, to feed more mouths, to keep everyone happy. But are we happy? Is this what makes us happy, doing more, making more? Are we happier than our ancestors who found enough for today and who came upon this absolutely perfect valley and gave thanks for the abundance it provided and then went back to their life of survival? Are we happier than them with where we've gone since they first found it? I don't know that we are. But I do know that we can't overlook the rivers. We can't lose sight of the rivers around us. And we can't lose sight of the rivers within us. Because when we do, we start doing all the things we've done to the Mississippi and the Tigris and the Euphrates and all the others. We start doing that to ourselves. We start hemming ourselves in and trying to become something we're not, something less than we were meant to be. Many years after we first told the story of Eden, long after there was a we, and weed followed the rivers all over the earth, the Gospel of John tells us that Jesus declared that out of the hearts of those who trust him would flow rivers of living water. Rivers that would branch and fork just like that one out of Eden and point others toward the source. Rivers that would flow through the wilderness of our lives, giving life to all that come our way. Rivers that would flow into life's stormy seas and transform them into calm waters. If we take Jesus at his word, then those who live like him are like the Gihon and the Pishon, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Rivers that can lead weary travelers struggling to make it through another day, toward an answer to their wonderings and their longings, or toward the fruitfulness of God's original blessing, not the shame of any original sin. We've dammed up nearly every river in America, and many around the world. There's only one in the lower 48 we've let stay wild, and it flows not far from my house. They still carry our baggage, these rivers, but not as much of our adventure. Most of them are too hemmed in by what we think or believe a river should be for us to even pay attention to them anymore. We've done the same things to the rivers that could be flowing out of us. We've boxed ourselves into what we think we're supposed to be. We've forgotten that original blessing that begins this whole story of Eden, and we've traded it in for focusing only on the mistake, the curse, the failure. My friend Boyce, who just wrote a book about the Mississippi River, knows that it's too late to return it to its natural, wild, adventurous state. But it might not be for our inner rivers. We owe it to each other to help restore and replenish and reinvigorate all of our rivers in all the ways that we can. Because there's somebody out there walking upstream, searching for the source, seeing things all around them that make them wonder, how did this all happen? Where is this all coming from? For them, be a river that they'll follow that will lead them to that source. There's somebody out there walking downstream, wondering, where is all this going? Be a river for them that will lead them to the abundance. There's somebody out there standing at the edge of the river, one of our rivers, not sure what to do, and invite them to jump in, to chance the rapids, take a wild ride down the river. Invite them to step in gently and feel the power of the water as it pushes past them. Show them a pool where they can wade and wonder for a while and remember that this story, our story, life, begins with blessing and not with curse. Don't lose sight of the truth that just like Eden, there's a river full of living water carrying God's original good and perfect work flowing out of you. A river full of living water, a river someone might find and follow to see where it leads, to see what lies beyond. Les Stroud and Bear Grylls were both right. Find the rivers and you'll make it home. Find a river that will lead you to the source. Find a river that will lead you to abundance. Be a river that will guide someone else on their journey. The rivers are how we find our way back home. God Knows Where is written, produced, and edited by me, Brett Harris, with music from Thomas Steinwinder and Michael Trest, and unwavering support from my wife, Elizabeth. If you like what you've heard from God Knows Where, leave us a rating or a review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. It will help other folks find us here. You can also show your support for God Knows Where by visiting godknowswhere.supercast.com to subscribe to the show and get access to our seasonal series and study guides. Thanks for listening. Until next time, carry these words from William Sloane Coffin with you. May God give you the grace never to sell yourself short, grace to risk something big for something good, grace to remember that the world is too dangerous for anything but truth and too small for anything but love. So may God take your eyes and see through them, your minds and think through them, and your hearts and set them on fire.